kick this stuff off. I'm going to start off way. Yeah, you can let me talk, and then I guess we'll be all right. You roll? Yeah. Your time code and everything cool?
Just a minute.
Yeah, great. And going back to the mid-40s, what were the opportunities like for actors in Montreal? Was there an acting scene to speak of?
Well, to begin with, I had nothing to do with the mid-40s. I mean, I didn't come into Montreal until February 1946 when I came out of the Air Force. Although I was born in Windsor, I went to England when I was 8 in 1935. So when I was 19, I came out as an ex-pilot in the RAF at the end of the war, and I returned to Canada, but to Montreal where I had an aunt and uncle. So I didn't come into that scene until the beginning of 1946. And then I looked around to see if there was a theater around, and someone said, oh, if you're interested in theater, you have to go and see Doreen Lewis at the MRT. I said, what's the MRT? Montreal Repertory Theater. Fine. So I had an appointment, went down and saw their production of, what the hell was it, directed by Bobby Beatty, the Welsh thing. Oh, anyway. So I had an interview with her, and she said, are you interested? Could you work backstage? Could you do this, that, and the other thing? I said, fine, sure, I'm keen to do it. I mean, what was my training? Nothing. Except I had an interest in drama, and I'd always listened to BBC and gone to theatre in London and so on. Anyway, so in the fall, I started backstage. So I did like 4 productions backstage, then I started to act with them and so on. But you asked me, what is it like at the mid-40s? I couldn't tell, because mid-40s for MRT was the MRT Tin Hats. They did a review, and they played to 60,000 servicemen all over Quebec. I'm not sure if they played Ontario, but certainly in Quebec, and like Valcartier and so on. They had a mixed, some French people with them, but they did this review mainly with Bob Goodyear and Lionel Merton and John Pratt. And they're a big success, you know. MRT was sort of a bit in the doldrums then, because everybody, no one was sort of really thinking too much about theatre at that time. All the men were away and so on, difficult to cast. And Fillmore Sadler was running it then, and they did their seasons, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, and so on, but they weren't raising any dust, you know what I mean? It was just sort of lying fallow. Only at 46 when everything started to really surge again, and Roberta Beatty was directing, and Doreen Lewis was the supervising producer, and she was dynamite, you know. I mean, actually there was a reference here to who was it starting? Fillmore Sadler starting up the school at the end of the war. No, he didn't restart the school. He did it originally in 1932 with his wife, Madge Sadler. So Fillmore and Madge, he was an American, she was from South Africa. And they came to Montreal. They had met in Boston at the Leyland Power School. And he had an interview with Martha Allen and Rupert Kaplan, who was very close to Martha and so on. And so they hired him as a director and to start the school, basically. And that's when it started in 1932. So Yvette Brandemoor actually came into that school in 1932, 33, somewhere in there, as a young teenager. But after the end of the war, when it was restarted, the school was restarted by Doreen Lewis and Roberta Beatty. Roberta was sort of the head of it, and Doreen got it all moving. And I belonged to it. I joined the theatre school with Yvette. Okay, she came back again.
So you mentioned Yvette Brandemoor. Who were some of the...
You got one color out, one color in.
One shoe off, one shoe on. How about that? It'll never cut. Never mind, carry on. Now I take my glasses off and we'll be fine, right?
You mentioned already Miss...
Who? Martha?
No.
Beatty.
Brandemoor.
Brandemoor, yeah.
Brandemoor. Who were some of the other people you remember from the company early on, whether backstage or front of stage, some of the characters, some of the people in the company?
What do you mean, the sort of, when I first got in there, you mean sort of around 46? Well, I came out of the RAF. Leo Cicely had come out of the RCAF. Leo, he was not aircrew or anything like that, but Leo was at McGill then. And Leo was in a play called Snafu with Mildred Mitchell, and she directed it. So some of the names were like Madeline Sherwood. Madeline Sherwood became a big professional. She was in the movie Picnic with Jack Carson and so on. She was in, I think, about 3 productions for MRT. Mary Douglas was there, Bob Goodyear, of course. Bob was right out of the Navy show. They made a film of that in England, actually, and it did quite well. He'd been overseas entertaining with the Navy show with John Pratt. And Bob's wife then was Eileen Clifford, and Eileen and he did a few shows there. Joy LaFleur, who was a very attractive lady, as someone called her, the Little Bankhead of Canada. And she was a powerful lady. We worked together quite a lot in CBC Radio here in Toronto later. Charles Rittenhouse, of course, was a sort of a standby. Charles directed, he acted and so on. And of course Mildred Mitchell, who was a professional actress, and she directed and played too. And other people came and went, you know, I mean.
You mentioned Leo Chichery just there now. You know he had a tragic ending, didn't
Yeah.
he?
Yeah.
Anything else about his life? Did you continue knowing him well? I'd like to.
Leo.
You mentioned him with some of our other interviews, and we might want to toss in another quote.
Yeah. Well, Leo's he's a very nice guy. You know, when he graduated from McGill, somebody arranged an interview for the Old Vic School, and Herbie recommended him. Herbie Whittaker, critic then for the Gazette, of course, Montreal. And anyway, he was accepted. So Leo trudged off to London into the Old Vic School. And so we kept up a correspondence back and forth. So I have those letters still, of course, about various things he'd seen there and various people he'd met. And he played with all kinds of people. Gielgud, he played with Michael Redgrave and Tiger at the Gates. He did a fair number of productions. But Leo was never a big name. Leo never really, I don't think, sort of knew who he was. Leo tried to be very English, and he used to get his A's mixed up from last and lost and lost and last and those kind of thing. But he was a very solid guy, physically a very well-built fellow, and he took dance with Ruth Sorrell and her dance group in Montreal in those days, in 1946, and he was very good. In fact, I think Leo would have been a much better dancer, except he was a bit muscly, but he would have been probably a better dancer than an actor. But he came back, he went to Stratford after a while. He was there for quite a long time, for many years, and then he came back, he came full circle, came back to MRT. He played Hamlet in a production that I saw, which was sort of so-so, I thought. And he was in Roar Like Dove, Leslie Storm's play, and Jane Mallet came from Toronto, and Jimmy Evans came from Toronto. They were in that, and Beryl Baxter. And Leo was very good. He did another production with Eleanor Stewart, who was, you know, one of the great ladies of Canadian theatre in Montreal. And Eleanor and he were in The Importance of Being Earnest. And I saw that one too, with Herbie Whittaker and other friends in Montreal. Leo couldn't play those finer, nice things of comedy. He just didn't have that actually, it was a British touch. And once you've seen Gielgud play it, as I have, I mean, there was nobody else who could play it like Gielgud, who was perfection in that role. Anyway, he was a very nice guy. And it was a tragedy when he was being driven to the airport by this priest or something, and they went off the road, and he had his legs crushed, and he said, "I just don't want to live." And I don't know what happened, what the circumstances were, but he died. So he's a very nice guy. Leo was about, I think, about a year older than me or something like that, but nice guy.
Goodyear and Ellen Clifford, were they
Yeah,
a known couple?
Eileen.
Eileen Clifford, were they a known couple? Were they
Oh yeah,
what
in
was
Montreal?
their
Oh
name?
sure.
Yeah, and would they be known walking down the street?
I don't know, was anybody ever known down the street like that, unless you're a film star? Bob was a very handsome guy, sort of black patent leather head, and a very good impersonator, a nice voice, rich voice, and lots of fun. Not too much depth, but I mean, he was a very good, solid actor. I mean, just kind of whatever you want me to play, I'll play it. And Eileen, she was very good too. Anyway, they were married for a number of years, but she retained, in those days, a little different, she retained her own name. Her brother Jack Clifford used to produce the MRT Tin Hats during the war, and she was with that, and as Bob was. That's where they met, I think. The very first production I was involved in at MRT was the Uncle Harry by Thomas Job, a murder mystery thriller, very good one. And they played the leads in it. That was my first introduction to theatre, myself, and these two. And I'd know them, you know, I still know them. I don't know whether they're both alive today, but anyway, I did interview Bob. He was a few physical problems and things, but nice guy, and he did a lot of shows. He was one of the, I suppose, the busiest actor in MRT over the years. Probably played in MRT more than any other actor, was Bob Goodyear. He was a very utilitarian actor. No matter what it is, you wanted to play this, that, and the other thing, you'd always rely on Bob, and you pull him in. Martha Allen used to, I have a letter that she wrote to him, a little note saying, "Dear Bob, thank you so much for stepping in. Here's my little check, etc., you know, $50 or something, you know," which was very nice, because Bob was kind of like always a professional. He was involved in reviews and things at Victoria Hall, and they were amateurish, I think. But he was always doing radio work, so he always got a few bucks here and there. So he kept, he was kept alive that way. He didn't have to go and work in a bank, as I did, and other things, you know. So Bob was always managed to keep us a pro. excuse me, Eileen, by the way, there was a soap opera that started at CBC in Montreal, done by Rupert Kaplan, producer, and it was called Laura Limited. And Laura Limited was on it live every day, 5 days a week, at 12 noon. And all the sort of good actors in Montreal played on Laura Limited at some point or another. Chris Plummer played Paul, her brother, the Nasty. And Chris played, I think, for about a year before he went off to Toronto, and then Bermuda, and then New York, and so on. And when he left, I took over his role of Paul. I'd never played on it before, but when he left, Kaplan said, could you do kind of a plumber? So I did. And then the writer of that soap was a woman called Nancy Moore in New York, and she heard the recordings of it and so on. She said, he's great, keep him. You know. So I did it for about a year or so before I moved to Toronto, too. We all had the old trail, you know, Toronto, London, or Toronto, New York.
Union Street means something to you, right?
No, Union Avenue. Union Avenue, 1463 Union was where basically MRT started. It was formed in 1929, and Sir Barry Jackson was over from England and so on. There was a big meeting. Helen Trenham was a well-known actress in New York. She came up, Canadian, but she came up from New York for this, Martha, a friend of Martha's. So they started in 1929, and they started productions in 30-31, and they called themselves the Theatre Guild of Montreal. And their first production was The Perfect Alibi, A.A. Milne, and we played to start with. And the next one was going to be Canada by Shaw. So the rights for that in North America were held by the Theatre Guild of New York. So they weren't prepared to let the Theatre Guild, so-called of Montreal, take this on. So they had to change the name, because Shaw had done this, so no two theatre guilds in North America. So they changed it to MRT Presents, and then they changed it. The third or fourth production was the Montreal Repertory Theatre. But on Union Avenue, cramped quarters, used to go up a high, narrow staircase, and there was a column at the top and so on. I was never in there. It was gone and finished by the time I came on the scene. Herbie Whittaker was there. Herbie was a designer then, you know, not director. He was a designer around. But it was useful. They did so many things in that little tiny place, which was originally used by architects and painters, like, what's his name, Bellier. He painted there. In fact, he used to call it the Atelier, and I think when he moved out, MRT moved in through Martha Allen. So they were there until 1941, and then 1941 they bought or rented, they never bought, they rented 1550 Guy Street just below Sherbrooke Street. And they didn't move in there fully until 1943 with the production of Watch on the Rhine with Bob Goodyear again. But in 41 they started to renovate it. Louis Mulligan, who's one of the staunch supporters and part of the Eminence Grise of MRT, he raised money and so on and put a lot of his own money into fixing up the MRT on Guy Street.
So they abandoned this. Is this true that it was a former? The
I
Atelier was an indoor golf
hadn't
course?
a clue. An indoor golf course. What? I don't
Probably
believe that's a
maybe
lot of spooky nonsense, if you ask me.
It could be a later incarnation for 2 weeks.
Yeah,
Obviously it would have gone bust.
Oh, yeah. Nothing to do, I guarantee you, with the Union Avenue MRT. Now, mind you, they only played the studio ones here, right? I mean, they used to play all over the place. Their big productions at the Ritz-Carlton Ballroom, right? They had several there. In fact, the first one, the A. Milton, was at Ritz-Carlton. Then they played masses of them at Victoria Hall in Westmount. I mean, that was one of the stand places. The odd one they played at Windsor Hotel. They did one, the French one, Noé, André Aubé's Noé. They did that at the Jesu Hall, right, on Blurry. Normally they didn't play there, but they did that one there, probably because it was surrounded by the French population, so I don't know, but it's all done in English, so, excuse me, French, what am I talking about? They did 2 productions in French, I think, major productions, what they call major productions. I would just explain. MRT did about, 8 or 9 major productions a season, and then they did several studio productions, the smaller, cheaper, simpler sets, giving opportunities to new actors, new writers, new directors, and so on. So when people say, oh, that was an MRT production, well, it might have been, but it was probably a studio production and not a major production. The major production was for the membership, and that was for, popular plays, New York, British Fair. And your experimental work was done in the studio. There was, a subscription and membership for that too, but it's much, much cheaper. You went to the studio productions for, 75 cents, $1 and a quarter or something, whereas the majors were, $1.75 and $2 or something like that, very, very cheap. But so when I say major productions, they had these two French productions were majors. The first one was the El Souriant Madame Baudet and at the Ritz, and then they did the Noé at the Jesu. And Martha Allen really wanted to set out and do a totally bilingual theater. She wanted I don't know perhaps whether she wanted alternating French and English productions, but she wanted to use and make use of all these French-Canadian actors that had nowhere else to play. It's extraordinary that so Montague Allen's daughter, society woman, actually a very, very charming woman, a wonderful organizer and a brilliant promoter. Not much of an actress, not much of a director. She always had to have Rupert there to help her through, but a wonderful promoter. That was her strength. She was able to put together pieces, money, support anywhere. She was just great. She was one of the original founders, of course, with John Buck and Lord Tweesmere of the Dominion Drama Festival back in 1933, I think it was. Anyway, here she was giving the opportunity to all these French-Canadian actors. You know what I mean? It was extraordinary that they said, well, they're playing at the odd college, high school, and so on. They had nowhere to play. Martha suddenly, of course, she's high profile. She started all this business with the MRT, and they all said, where can we act? Right. They ran an ad in the paper saying, hey, we need people. Come, act. This is where Yvette Brandemour, at the age of 16, 17, saw an ad in the paper, said, oh, you need actors? I'll come. So she was able to use people like Gratien Gélina, who was just another French-Canadian actor then, Yvette Brandemour, teenager. Let me just read you, if I may, a few of the names of the French actors who were involved at MRT over the years, most of them in the early years, and some of the others played, but they played in English, right? So when Martha established the studio productions in 1932, English, then she established in 1933, the following year, she established the L'Atelier, which was, of course, the French studio. And she, because she couldn't handle the business of trying to do major productions in French and major productions in English, it was too much. So she said, fine, I'm going to have studio productions over here in French. And she had a fellow called Fernand Bionde. And Ferdinand Bionde. And he was the man at the CKSA, Montreal, right? He was a program director or something. Very, very nice guy. And he ran that for a while. He ran the L'Atelier. And in there, all the French-Canadian actors came. Yvette Mercier-Gouin, who was married to a senator and so on. She wrote plays, she directed plays, she acted in plays. We have, let me just read a few. For Montreal, some of the names are very, very well known. The rest of Canada, they say who, but Hector Chatelain, there was the old miser on the soap opera and radio that went on for 1 million years. Un homme sans péché, right? They used to, people used to send in shoes for his children. I mean, what? Henri Bastier, Henri Lutandel, a wonderful daughter too, Giselle. Giselle Schmidt, she may be still around, I don't know, but she was around those days. Yvette Brandemour, of course, Yvette Mercier-Gouin, Ferdinand Bionde, Gratien Gélina, Alfred Brunet, Judith Jasmine, Marcel Lefort, Suzanne Goyette, Laurette Fournier, Amanda Allary, who is in the Plou family, right? François Bertrand, Guy Beaune, who was also a director later, Denise Pelletier. Denise Pelletier joined the school, I think a little after Denise did, back in whatever it was, 1932, 33, somewhere in there. Suzanne Yvonne, no one seems to know her. She was somebody who acted absolutely beautifully in English. I mean, not a trace of an accent. She was absolutely wonderful, a beautiful girl, talented actress. And we did several shows together. I mean, Suzanne, she ended up by marrying she married the lead singer of Les Compagnons de la Chanson, who were a group of prisoners of war guys that Edith Piaf brought to Montreal and promoted, and they just went on and on and on. They're wonderfully talented guys who are acrobats and musicians and so on. And she married the lead singer there, Freddie. And they still live outside of Paris and very happy with children and so on. But Suzanne was a terrific gal, and she was French-Canadian. I met her. Her mother, my God, it couldn't be more French, but she was in, for instance, the Barris of Wimpole Street, and she was so English. She plays, oh, my darling, my father, I mean, just beautiful. Jean-Louis Paris, who acted later at the MRT, Louis Turenne, Paul Blouin. Paul Blouin, who's been a producer for many years, director at CBC, Radio Canada, and Paul was actually originally from Winnipeg. So he's not a he's a French Canadian, but from Winnipeg, not Montreal. Although Paul's lived in Montreal for many years. Very nice guy. Michel Tessier, who was an interviewer for various that's what fashion shows and so on. She also was a straight actress and pretty good. Louise Perrault. Then you have writers and directors who worked at this, the L'Atelier, Mercien Gouin, Yvette, and Palacio Morin, Arthur Prévost, Jean Béraud, who he was also a historian. He tracked down all the theatre that had gone on in Quebec for 300 years or something. An amazing guy, yeah. And he used a pseudonym for something. I forget what his pseudonym was. And Paul Guerremont, a good director. Anyway, those are some of the names of the French people who came and went throughout the Atelier. They played one-act plays, skits, reviews, things like that. Well, Martha Allen would sometimes play with them, because Martha was completely, fluently bilingual. And that's another reason why she wanted to have French-English, because it gave her a chance to show off herself. She could play in English this week and French next week, you know, and very, talented in that respect. A good sense of the theatre. She had seen all the theatre in Europe after the First World War. She had driven an ambulance in the First World War. She donated her own money, of course. She bought an ambulance and drove it like crazy in France and so on. And then afterwards she met Reinhardt, Max Reinhardt, and all this. And so she'd seen a lot of the good theatre. She'd been steeped in it. And so when she came back, she wanted to be involved in it. Now she started something with Louis Mulligan and a couple of others called the Community Players Community Players Theatre. And that only went for a couple of productions. John Hoare was involved in that from England. And that sort of collapsed and nothing happened for a while. And then she came up with the idea of the Montreal Repertory Theatre, and she started afresh. But and that was involving Sir Barry Jackson to promote it, to get it going. She wanted something like the Birmingham Repertory Theatre. The Birmingham Rep is what she'd love to have had here. Couldn't do that because Birmingham Rep was professional, and this was not. This was amateur. And MRT, over a period from about 1929 to 1961, when it folded, was mainly amateur, and then it became semi-professional, and then it became fully professional under Bruce Raymond in the last few years. But the times had changed in those days. But by the time it folded, television was here. They couldn't. The English actors were gone to Toronto or New York or London. The whole climate had changed, and it was very difficult for them to try to keep going with good things. They had to import people all the time. They couldn't afford that, so they folded.
What was the Mount Royal Theatre France?
Well, that was a guy called Mario Giuliani, who was an Italian journalist who had come to Montreal before the war, and he became involved with L'Atelier, and then he somehow, with Martha, I guess or with Finland and Biondi went off to another group called the Stella Theatre, professional theatre, and Giuliani somehow did a deal with Martha that he would take it over. He said, "I'll run it." And there was another eminence grise in the background. He was a lawyer, a notary, Emery Faneuf, and he put a lot of the money in with Martha, I think, to keep the French thing going. I'm not sure. But anyway, Giuliani took it over, and he decided to keep the same notepaper, so he said MRT, Montreal Repertory Theatre, so he called it Montréal Théâtre Français. So he kept the same notepaper, but he called it that, MRT Français. Martha presented a couple of things to the Dominion Drama Festival, one-act plays and so on, under the title of MRT Français. They did a play, I remember, by Sacha Guitry, and she played in herself. She also wrote plays, Martha. She wrote All on a Summer's Day, which won one of the awards at one of the festivals, Dominion Drama Festival. So Martha was all around very, very talented. But Mario Giuliani, he ran this from probably about 1933 until 1939, the beginning of the war, then it all folded. He was actually dumped into an internment camp with Camille Hanoud, mayor of Montreal, for a number of years, and they were there 5 years, all during the war sort of thing. And when they came out, who wrote the book? It was Giuliani, I think so, called 5 Years Without Women, or something like that. But Giuliani was he was kind of an operator, from what I understand, from people like Yvette, who worked with him and so on. He was a hustler, kind of putting things together, always on the telephone, but he did some directing and so on. He put the thing together, and it worked. They kept this group going. But that was the MRT Français, and then, of course, when he folded, it just disappeared, Okay. You're running out?
Yeah, it means 5-minute warning. Yeah, thanks. In those days, let's see. Very good.
If you close your eyes, I'll stop.
Let's get into the area of
dinner.
Sorry?
The collaborations then.
Mm-hmm.
Did many collaborations happen from the time? And it doesn't matter if you're acting or backstage or whatever. Did you see the theaters working together in those early days at all?
You mean French-English?
Yeah.
No, nothing. No, at MRT, we'd have French actors who were coming to play in English, as long as their English was good enough, to play with in an English play. But the other person would direct, like Pierre Dagenet, wonderful director. But, the idea of competitions, MRT's competition, if you like, was really Father Pierre Legault's Les Compagnons de Saint-Laurent, right? Because he had all the best French actors, the Jean Gascon, Jean Leroux, and Georges Groux, any number of them. They were so terrific. Jean Coutu, Jean La Jeunesse, they played with these guys. In fact, Pierre Dagenet played with them for a while. Excuse me, and then Pierre decided, he thought Legault was a fake and a clown. So he said to hell with it. And he cut loose and started his own group, L'Équipe. I think it was 1943. And Pierre was brilliant. Pierre was looked on as the Orson Welles of Quebec. Time magazine did an article on him. So this guy is brilliant. He's an actor, he's a director, he does everything well. Big voice from Pierre Dagenet, And he was wonderful. He had these two black eyes that would look at you and bore a hole right through you. And Roberta Beatty, the other very professional director, same way. I call them the black-eyed twins, When they looked at you, they would burn a hole right through you. Wonderfully talented, both of them. But sense of competition, not really. The Dominion Drama Festival, Les Compagnons would take the top awards in French, and we would take the top awards in English. We did the Barons of Wimpole Street. The best actress in English went to Eleanor Stewart. The best actor in English went to George Alexander. The best supporting actor in English went to me. And the other side, it was Antigone, Les Compagnons' production of Antigone, with Thérèse Cadaret. And this kind of thing, just super. But no sense of competition with them. We were not saying, hey, we're trying to fight with them. No, we just did our productions. We just sort of met a little bit at the Dominion Drama Festival, the local Quebec one, and then maybe the final one,
The question likely arises because we did have a great deal of, Toronto French-Canadian theatre rivalry, because when there was a vacuum here, there wasn't one in Quebec, at least at one given time.
Mm-hmm.
I have reference to Asmodee, directed by Pierre Dagenet. Why is that standing out here?
Well, Pierre, this brilliant Pierre, had done a production, and I don't know, it was the first production, of Midsummer Night's Dream at L'Hermitage on Côte-des-Neiges Road in Montreal. And he had done this before my time in Montreal, all in French, and it was a big success. And Herbert Whittaker had seen it and reviewed it for the Gazette, and Charles Rittenhouse had seen it. And Charles was head of the Montreal Protestant School Board English Department. And he was responsible for putting these stages in about, 75 schools or something, Charles was amazing. He did a lot of terrific work for Montreal theatre and theatre in general in Canada. He's also a writer sometime and a director and not a very good actor. But he didn't think so, of course. Anyway, so they both asked Pierre if he would like to direct one of the Shakespearean productions. Now, it's often looked at Montreal Shakespearean Festival. There's no such thing. There were 3 productions done for the Shakespeare Society of Montreal, which is an offshoot of Montreal Repertory Theatre. It's just another title, right? Something done in the summer. So it was the first year they did Much Ado About Nothing with I used to think he was English. He was a professor at McGill, or assistant professor, Jacques Dandeau. And later I saw his name, it's Jacques Dandeau. So I don't know whether Jacques was French Canadian. I guess he was, I'm not sure. I don't know where he ended up. Very pleasant guy and could play light comedy beautifully. And an English actress called Cecily Howland, who was a professional actress from England, was here in Montreal, involved with the Oxford unit and so on, the Oxford movement, and she was a little offbeat, but a very good actress. And the two of them in Much Ado, it was a big success. The next year they wanted to do King Lear. So he also joined the backstage crew, and I started working on Clary.
Everything all right, Leslie?
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
If he wants to get through, we can.
Okay, we're rolling.
3, 2, 1. And you were talking about King Lear as the last word.
Yeah, the Shakespeare Society of Montreal, an offshoot of MIT, decided to do King Lear as their second production in 1945. And they asked Pierre Dagenet, who had done the successful production in French of Midsummer Night's Dream, if he'd come and direct it. So, of course, he was very flattered and so on. So Pierre directed King Lear, starring Christopher Ellis. Now, Chris Ellis was an Englishman who was in Montreal, did a lot of radio, had a wonderful, wonderful, deep, reverberating voice. And Chris did commercials for then Molson's, Dawes, Black Horse Brewery, whatever it was. He did very, very well as a voice. Rather a stiff actor. I don't think he had much stage experience. Certainly, I don't think in England did Chris Ellis. But he was apparently a very moving Lear. Anyway, that production was done, and then their third production, which turned out to be their last production for the Shakespeare Society, was Romeo and Juliet in 1947. And I did the chorus in that. I shared it with John Martin Baxter. And Chris Plummer was in that. Christopher played Paris. Sam Thatcher, of course, Betty Taylor was Juliet. And Romeo was a dreary nobody actor called Ken Lee Smith. That wasn't his real name. I think he invented that because he didn't want people to know he was an actor. And of course he wasn't an actor, so it wouldn't have mattered. And he was the boringest, dullest guy in the world. Nice looking fellow, but had no talent. But God knows why he was ever cast by Charlie Rittenhouse. Anyway, so there were only 3 productions, so it was never a Shakespeare festival. Unlike the Montreal festivals that went on every summer, which were all organized by the city of Montreal. And we did our production, I say our production because I was in it, of King Lear in, 1953, the year that Stratford opened. So I turned Stratford down because they offered me little bits and pieces, did Guthrie, so I didn't want those. And Richard Easton replaced me and did very well for Richard. He went back to England with Alec Guinness, and Tiff Finley took those 2 guys back and put them in various productions and sent them to school there. But anyway, the Lear we did on the mountain were part of Montreal festivals, starring John Colicos. And John had just played King Lear at the Old Vic in London. He'd understudied Stephen Murray. They'd gone on tour, and Murray, classic case of getting laryngitis, and John went on for him. And John took London by storm, shall we say. I mean, they really sat up and took notice of this young 21-year-old Canadian, Colicos, who could play Lear. I mean, they couldn't believe it. Who is this guy? The Canadian? What? So John had played this very successfully. And then when he came back, I can't remember exactly when, but for 53, he was asked to do the Lear on the mountain, part of the Montreal festivals. And Pierre was directing it. Charles Rittenhouse was producing it, and Herbie Whittaker was doing the sets and the costumes for it. And it was a big kerfuffle. I mean, it was for one night. One night performance. You had like 3,000 people, all open to the elements. An incredible wind came up like a hurricane. And here we are, all standing in these flimsy costumes, being blown all over the place, and John trying to hang on to his crown and saying, blow winds and crack your cheeks. And of course, we were all kind of breaking up a bit, but because indeed the wind was blowing. And we had the RCMP off-duty guys running around as part of the army, the opposing armies and so on. And it was a bizarre evening. John was not at his best, I don't think. I mean, who could be with this? I played Edmund. Strange character. And but Pierre, as usual, was a very interesting director. He felt, when I interviewed him later for something else, Pierre thought that his direction of the first production of Lear that he'd done for Herbert and Charles for the Shakespeare Society was better than the second one. And felt that Christopher Ellis was a warmer human being, you know. He felt that John, he said, when you listened to John, you sort of, you didn't get the humanity that Chris Ellis had put into it. John was very much more technical and a lot colder as Lear and so on. So it was, Pierre wouldn't have said that at the time, but he did afterwards, and in the 80s when I talked to him about it.
Would Pierre Dagenet continue contributing to the MRT through the years you'd be there?
What did Pierre do? He did one of the Love of Four Colonels. I was not there then. Let me just have one look if I may.
What about Asmodee? That's not Lear, is it? What's Asmodee?
Asmodee?
Yeah.
No, that's a play by François Mauriac. And
Translation of something.
no. Well, it's a French play, and Asmodee is supposed to be the little spirit that sits on the chimney and looks down into a household and kind of sees what the private machinations are between people and relationships and so on. That was kind of interesting because when Pierre cast that play, I was a backstage worker. I just come on the scene, And I was asked whether I would read for the part of the young man called Harry Fanning, the student and so on. So, okay, Adelaide Smith was playing one of the leads, and Betty Wilson, who was a very good actress. She's now the big lady of casting in New York and has been for many years for all the soap operas. You'll have soap opera awards, they all say, and my thanks to Betty Wilson. Oh my God, Betty Wilson Ray, they call her. But Betty was a very good actress. We played later at Bray Manor in 50 and 38, she and I together. But for Asmodee, they wanted me to come and read for this Harry Fanning part. Of course, I was terrified. Of course, being a young kid of 19 or so, and I never acted in my life, kind of thing. So there was another unknown guy who had also been asked to come in and read for it, and his name was Christopher Plummer. So that's when I first met Chris, and we both sat outside waiting when we read for Pierre, and Roberta Beatty was in because she was helping Pierre because his English wasn't too good, and he had asked her to sit in on these readings. So Chris went in and just tossed it off and came back. I went in like this and sort of stumbled through it and came out. So we talked about it, and of course they cast Chris Plummer. Why not? Who wouldn't? I would too. And so Chris was in that. That was his. He did Asmodee, and then he was in, funnily enough, a studio production that I starred in Coriolanus, 1951, I think it was. Yeah, 49. And I persuaded Chris to take a part and played a Volscian senator in it because he was back from CRTC. He was drifting in Montreal. He wasn't doing anything. I said, oh, come on, play in this. So he wasn't paid for anything else. But anyway, he came in and played that. So those are the only two things Chris ever did was Asmodee, and he was at high school then, and the one later in Coriolanus. And it was kind of interesting because he was supposed to play Coriolanus for the National Theatre in London for Laurence Olivier. And when they came to have the first reading, he found it wasn't Shakespeare's Coriolanus, it was Bertolt Brecht's Coriolanus version. And so he got, according to Chris, he got all kind of uppity about this and said, keep it. I'm doing Shakespeare Coriolanus or I'm not doing it. So it worked out. And they got Anthony Hopkins to play this. And Hopkins said, never mind Boyo. You know, he's a Welshman, Anthony Hopkins. Never mind Boyo, it's just another play, you know. Anyway, Chris... He said, I can hear Larry now saying, kid me, dear, you know, you should have played it. You would have been wonderful. Yeah, I understand you played the Volscian senator for Gilbert. Anyway, Chris does a nice little story about that. Anyway, enough. But Asmodee was, I tell you what was another wonderful thing about Asmodee. Pierre Dagenet not only directed it, but he designed the set for it. And this was quite extraordinary for the time. A 3-act play, and it was all took place in one room. But he moved the set around so that each act was a different perspective on the room. So you had the kind of thin white wooden structure. You're looking out, so supposedly over the sea that way. And then the next act, you see part of it. And the last act, it's right in front of the audience. So you see into the room from the outside. And at the very end, when the Charles Rittenhouse character comes up and he pulls the drapes, he really pulls the drapes. The curtain comes forward and closes the thing, you know, which is really kind of a nice touch, and everyone went kind of wild about that. That was Pierre. I mean, he's always a wonderfully imaginative guy. Very, very dynamic director. I mean, difficult. So what? People are who have talent, you know.
Okay. John Corey, wow, you're hitting a lot of...
Sorry, I've jumped around all over the place for you here.
Yes, it's great. But yeah, it's true. It's trying to decide where I am right now.
Just about. Maybe I can help you.
I know where I'm at now.
Oh, okay.
Roberta is the next question, but do I want to milk you on some of this other stuff, you know? It's okay, I'm taking notes, I'll come back.
Okay, Bobby, Roberta Beatty, she was a professional actress. She used the name Roberta Brown. I don't know whether that was which was which, but anyway, she was listed in New York as Roberta Brown. She was a singer and a very good actress. She toured with William Gillette in the Sherlock Holmes. She played opposite Lillian Gish. She played opposite Leslie Howard. She played opposite Eugenie Leontovich. She was well known. I mean, she's very, very strong person. Dynamic director, you better believe it. And Bobby arrived. She was, she was in Europe with a whole bunch of the, what do they call them? The not UNRWA, but something like that, to entertain the troops. They would do radio plays and things like that. You know, they'd do scenes, and Bobby was part of that group who went there. So I guess she came out of New York. I don't know. Anyway, she arrived back in Montreal, and she married a guy, a mining engineer called Julius Cohen. And they lived up on McGregor Apartments up there by the Montreal General. And so she, I don't know, she knew Doreen and so on. She became part of that whole scene. But she'd been around there before. I'm not quite sure how she sort of came back. But at the end of the war, in 1946, she became a director there, and she directed a lot of plays. And the best shows practically were done by Roberta Beatty, because she was a terrific director. The first one that I saw at MRT, The Corn is Green, was directed by her. I was in Amphitryon 38, directed by Bobby. The Barras at Wimpole Street, there are all kinds of awards, directed by Bobby. The Heiress Awards, directed by Bobby. You know, she did all these. Her conditions, I think, were that she chose the play, of course, and that she chose her cast. And if she couldn't get her cast, she didn't want to do it. You know, she wanted to be sure that she had the right horses to pull it. You know what I mean? And who can blame her? Any director would want that. But she was. She never ran off at the mouth. I mean, she wasn't a vociferous person. She would come in at a reading, and she would just look at you all, and she had these black eyes looking at you, you know. And she was very, very impressive. She used to wear these great, amazing black hats, feathers and things, you know. Hardly ever saw her without a hat. Right? She came in always in the classic black dress and single strand of pearls, and always seemed to be slightly tilted forward because of her shape. But was a very striking woman as a younger woman. I don't know how Bobby would have been when I met her. Probably 60-ish. I don't know. Anyway, this great, wonderful voice. She was on Laura Limited too. She played on radio, and she used to have little nodules inside her mouth here, and she used to chew these nodules, you know. And she'd look at you and jingle jangle a few bracelets. And she used to smoke these Buckingham cigarettes, strong as hell, you know. And she'd say, "Entertain me. People are paying money for this. Entertain me." You know, and she'd go back stomping on back and for everybody to rehearse. And she'd say, "I don't understand. What are you saying?" You know, she didn't suffer fool's gladly. She hated amateurs. She wanted a professional production. Mind you, Martha Allen, in the same vein, Martha did not like to be known as a head of an amateur organization. It was an amateur. She didn't like amateurs. She wanted a professional theater without paying people. You know, I mean, very difficult to do. But she tried to coerce everybody into doing this, the best. People would come through Montreal, whoosh, she'd grab them. Sort of a nothing actor. He made a number of features in Hollywood, a guy called Alan Marshall, sort of like a poor man's Errol Flynn. He did a lot of movies, but he came through Montreal from Australia, and she grabbed him. He was in one production, you know. She would pick up these people. She'd bring up like Helen Trenham, Sonner Alberg, his name was too. She had various people, she would put them in, you know, and they were all professionals. And I don't know whether she sort of slipped them a few bucks on the side, probably, but they worked for it. It was very good. But Bobby was the sort of classy director. Herbert Whittaker, who always wanted to direct and did a few shows for MRT. His last one for MRT was in 49, I guess it was, The Glass Menagerie. And then he got the offer to come to the Globe and Mail in Toronto. So would he leave the Gazette? Would he go there? He'd been toying with the idea of going to New York to design, because he's a very good designer. Brilliant designer, Herbie, for costumes and sets. From the point of view of drafting, he was not always that good, because his measurements were always off. He had to rely on Hans Behrens, the resident designer at MRT, to get him out of holes because that didn't fit. And Hans would say, "Don't worry, I'll fix it." No. But Herbie, of course, as a director, he did this Glass Menagerie, and because I was working there at the time, I was in and out of a lot of these rehearsals and so on. Always with Herbie, it's a little on the slow side, you know, and he pontificates a little bit and sort of drifts on. Well, again, if he's got good actors, I mean, he's happy. Well, Millie Hall was playing Amanda Winfield, and Millie was powerful, this high, and dynamite, you know, and a really good actress. And that was a brilliant show. But Herbie went to Toronto, and Bobby came in, Roberta Beatty, she came in and finished directing it. And Bobby gave it that twist that Herbie can't give a show. And Bobby, you know, just looked at him and said, "Fine, we changed it. Let me have you in here. Let me tell you that." No. And she built the climaxes. Herbie would often drift to climaxes. You know, I mean, he knew it, but as a director, he couldn't somehow get that from people. He'd probably hate me if he heard me say that. But anyway, but Bobby could do this and do it immediately, so that the Glass Menagerie went up here. Hugh McLennan wrote to Herbie some years later and said he'd seen the production with Lorette Taylor in New York, and he preferred the one he saw at MIT with Millie Hall. And Silvio Narzano played the son. Silvio was one of the early television directors here at CBC Toronto, And he also had worked with CAT, of course, with Joy Thompson. And he was an actor sometime. But Sil went on to do a lot of productions. He did Marlon Brando and a dog called, I don't know, Mr. Blue or something. He did one with James Mason, Georgie Girl. That made his name in England, sort of thing. Sil's done a lot of work, television and film. I think he's retired now. But anyway, go ahead.
You
Shoot.
mentioned a lot of the radio stuff,
Mm.
Mr. Kaplan, Rupert Kaplan, and all that down on, I guess, Dorchester Boulevard. Did you do a lot of that? Did you get acting bits, or did you work behind the scenes too in radio at all?
No, just strictly as an actor. Rupert was he was the kind of the powerhouse as far as keeping actors going, you know, because Montreal, from the English point of view, they only got the crumbs tossed out from Toronto, right? Toronto was the head, right? All the network heads were right here. So what Andrew Allen, J. Frank Willis, these guys didn't want, they tossed to Montreal, and Rupert can have it, you know. So he'd often get summer series when nobody else is around. They're all off the holiday, so who listens to radio kind of thing. And he'd get the odd Wednesday night, the odd bigger production, 2.5 hour Wednesday night. And he always had the Bible show, though. The Bible show was on a Sunday morning, live, 12 o'clock. And it was called The Way of the Spirit. The script's written by Canon J.E. Ward here in Toronto. But the Bible show, as we call it, was a lifesaver for many, many people. When we were, Colicos, myself, people like that who were up and acting in Toronto, we'd go back to Montreal for the weekend. Rupert always fitted you into the Bible show, you know. Yeah, it was very good. He was very good. Rupert was always impressed by actors who went away somewhere. He was always impressed by actors who went to New York, of course, or to London, or to Toronto, who made a living elsewhere. When they came back, he just said, what do you want to play? You know, more or less. He would just really treat you very well. If you stayed in Montreal, if you didn't make a move, even if you were good, he tended to sort of slough you off a little bit. You're not that important because you haven't stepped out into the big wide world and you haven't competed. So he sort of feels, oh yes, okay, I guess I have to have these guys. But he never treated you the same way. If once you step away, fine. Or if you came in from the professional theater, like a person like Jerry Rowan. Jerry was an American who started in stock, played with Mildred Mitchell at the old, whatever it was at the Empire in Montreal. And she was the highest paid actress in North America at that time, $400 a week, way back in the 30s, early 30s. And she was a very good actress, very competent. I never liked her very much. I always found her very cold, but she was a very competent actress. She could rattle off stock. You know, I mean, you pigeonhole all the roles. We used to do that in summer theater. But she was a good professional, and Rupert treated her well and treated Jerry Rowan very well because they were professionals when they came, like Roberta Beatty, a professional when she came.
Something quintessentially Canadian with Captain's
Yeah, true. You know, he was. He had his, what we always called his Jewish cast. His Jewish mafia was always, you know, the Normie Towers, Albert Miller, Max Schub, I don't know, a whole bunch of guys. And same guys turn up all the time. Rupert, all right, fine, let's have you, step up, let's have it, you know. And Rupert has a big booming voice himself, about this high, you know. He used to wear his pants up here somewhere, you know, he's on the braces. But, you know, I liked Rupert. Most people didn't like him. I could work with him. I just stay away from him. You don't ever get too close to Rupert, but he was fine. His laughter was always a little false, you know. He favored certain people like Eileen Clifford because he starred her in Laura Limited, the daily soap, and she wasn't on the Bible show very often. She used to play the odd role, but she would always, if there was a female role, he would give it to her. But the Wednesday nights we'd do with Rupert would be something like The Trial, Kafka's The Trial, which was a stunning production. Colicos played the lead in that, played Joseph K. I played in, I can't remember what I played. And Joseph Keeble, who became a great top executive with CTV Network. Then he was an announcer in Montreal, and Joseph Keeble announced that he did the narrator, and the opening line was, "Somebody had been telling lies about Joseph K." And this is the way the whole thing started. But it was a good production. We did The Second Scroll, A.M. Klein, Canadian, of course, poet, and Lauren Green came down for that, and Bud Knapp from Toronto. Did a wonderful, the first tribute to Eugene O'Neill after he died was done by Rupert Kaplan in Montreal. We did a CBC 2.5 hour Wednesday night. And Rupert had known O'Neill, the Provincetown Players, because Rupert was a professional. He had come back to Montreal because his father died, and he came back to look after his mother, would you believe, and he never left. But he was with the Provincetown Players, so he knew Eugene O'Neill very well, and he knew Carlotta, his widow. So he was able to get permission to do scenes from or productions of O'Neill's plays when other people couldn't. He did a couple for Théâtre du Nouveau Monde in English, which he directed, and he was able to do this. Wait a minute, I'm not quite sure that they were O'Neill's. No, excuse me, he did Montserrat, which was Lillian Hellman. I played the lead for him when we did it on the first English television drama out of Montreal, was Montserrat, with Virgin Newton and myself. I hadn't played the stage version because I was up here. And he did The Lark with Leo Cicery. That was not TNM, excuse me, that was Canadian, Gélina's theatre, Canadian Comédie Canadienne. All right. Anyway, Rupert did this tribute to O'Neill, and Carl Malden came up, free, because he wanted to take part in this. Brooks Atkinson came up, the big critic from the New York Times, free for expenses, I mean a plane ticket. And Brooks Atkinson introduced it. Carl Malden played in a couple of scenes, and of course Bob Goodyear and Colicos, myself, and all the rest was Jerry Rowan. We did these various scenes, and it was a terrific tribute. And I don't think there's a recording around anywhere. Rupert was very careless about those things. I mean, some of them came to me that I have. I have a production of The Lark, for instance. But Rupert used to toss them on a radiator, a quarter-inch tape, you know, and they kind of melted. And sometimes somebody would say, Gilbert, he'd give it to me, and I put it in my archives. But I didn't get that one. I have the script from it. I have the script, and I always kept the major scripts. I kept all those. And I've offered those to Concordia University, and they jumped for it, and they've never called me back since. And I said, well, you're crazy. Scripts like the classic Mr. Archelaus for Andrew Allen, all these, I've got all these scripts. Never mind. Crazy. Anyway, go ahead, shoot. Rupert was very, very good, though, to actors in Montreal. Not easy to work with. Bill Shatner had a small part in one broadcast, and who's Bill Shatner? He's a student at McGill. I mean, he's just a guy. So he came up, stepped up the microphone, and Bill's not the most proficient actor, I don't think. He sort of works for television, his personality and so on, but he stepped up to the mic and sort of mumbled something or other. Of course, Rupert's voice comes from the control room, booming out, all right, Shatner, take the muslin off the voice. Let's have it again. Come on, clean it up. You know, Bill's like this, of course, going scarlet. We're all standing right there. But he had no voice for that, you know. I mean, shoot.
Trying to do Streetcar maybe or something. Are there any old kinescopes of Montserrat?
I don't know. I haven't a clue. Probably not. I tell you what happened. Rupert, of course, directed it, but a French producer set up all the camera work because Rupert hadn't a clue about cameras. I mean, he was just saying, I'm directing a play. They say, yeah, but you can't do that. We need a camera here, we need to change, we have to stop here and overlap and so on. And he didn't understand that, so he had to step back and let this, I forget who the producer was. It may have been Roger Racine, I don't know, who was an actor also. He did some direction there. I'm not sure who did that. But Kinney, who knows?
Probably hop back to Montreal in a minute, but Andrew Allen you mentioned.
Yeah.
And Andrew Allen's been coming up quite a lot, as you can
see. Oh yeah, well, a giant. I mean, an intellectual, a talented man who people have lost sight of. Well, not actors certainly who worked with him, but he was a man who kept actors and writers together in this country. I mean, he was supervisor of radio drama. He would go out on a limb and do these productions that people didn't want. The board of CBC, I mean, you can't do that, and all these, you know, and he'd broadcast something, and all got upset, and letters would come in, they say, don't do that again. He'll say, yes, I am, because of so-and-so, you know. Andrew was such a powerful force that everybody sort of was a little intimidated by him. And who worked for Andrew? Everybody tried to. I was lucky when I came up from Montreal. I did everything I was in Montreal, but I came here and I stepped right into tons of work. I stepped into a soap opera for S.W. Young called Brave Voyage. And I worked for, I did Mr. Archelaus. It was the second time he'd done that production. And the first time the part that I played was played by Lloyd Bachner. So I played this uncle, whatever it was. So I started working for him. I worked for Art Hiller, who became a big name on television eventually. We all said when he transferred to TV, Art Hiller, he does Crossroads, he does radio. But he made the transition, went on to features, you know, and so on.
Great. As for the Gravenor Jalna, while he was at the MRT, is clearly before your time. But can you tell me what kind of a celebrity he was in Montreal at the time?
Well, I mean, I knew him. I went to see a couple of his freelance reviews. I mean, he's just a brilliant comic, and I mean, I just love what he did. But his Teacock, of course, originally called Teacock, and they had to change that for English. But Teacock in Montreal was great, and you know, he played it at Royal Alex, and they played it. Where did he take it to? Was it Chicago or somewhere? And I don't think it did too well. And then he came back to the Royal Alex, did very well here again. Mary Barclay, an English actress, was in that. She played the English sort of barmaid in that. George Alexander was in it, totally bilingual. He was from the Jersey Islands off England. George was a solid professional. He would do French radio, English radio. He worked all the time for Rupert. He did MRT. Very, very proficient actor. But freelance, I mean, you know, did I know him? No. When everything was collapsing, there was a general meeting. I was not there. Probably, I don't know, 60 or something. And he appeared at this because they're going to fold the MRT at that point. And he came, he stood up and said, no, one should keep this on because of the memory of Martha Allen, who was such a wonderful woman and so on. I mean, it's a very nice tribute that he paid to Martha Allen. So I think all the French Canadians at that point, they all have a high respect for Martha Allen, what she did. Yvette said, oh, she was such a wonderful woman. You know, she's a good director and an actress, and we all thought she was wonderful. Oh, if I could only be like Martha Allen. This is Yvette saying that, you know. Today, I mean, the French Canadians actors say, who, what, Martha, who, you know. But she gave a terrific opportunity to so many French actors. I know Jean Doucet and these people who were, you know, had Jean Doucet Theatre and so on later. Who's Martha Allen? You didn't know anything about that, you know. So today you'd have to stretch it. They'd say, I don't know who you're talking about.
The vision is in there. Thank you. Théâtre du Rideau Vert. Do you have any direct personal experience with Rideau Vert?
Théâtre
Du Rideau Vert.
Le Théâtre de Rideau Vert. No on the end. Yeah. Founded, I believe, in about 1948 by Yvette Brandemoor and a friend called Mercedes Palomino. And she, I think, had just come up from Spain or something. I believe she was a singer originally. Anyway, they founded the theater, but they didn't do very much. They didn't have any money. So, I mean, they do one little production and then fade for like 2 or 3 years or something, come back again with another little thing. Well, then they sort of found, you know, their feet, I guess, later in the 40s, and then they really started to go on. Drapeau made sure they got a theater. It was the one that had been used by the Stella Theater, professional group from France and so on, French actors from France, on Saint-Denis. And so he gave them that theater. And they're still there, and then they renovated it, and I think they started their sort of renovated theater in 1990. I haven't seen it, so I don't know. But Yvette, Pierre Dagenet always said of Rideau Vert that it was the most professional theater in Montreal. Because they did, you know, a straightforward kind of place and things. The odd one, they'd be a little different. But she made money for the place. I mean, it really did well. She would act sometimes, direct sometimes, but she gave lots of opportunity to many people. It was always disappointing she didn't use Pierre to direct, Pierre Dagenet. Pierre Dagenet was sort of squeezed out by the French acting community because he was not a separatist. Neither was Yvette, but the pressures to not to use Pierre Dagenet, because Pierre was a terrific writer, did tons of writing for radio, and as a director, wonderful. But everybody at that time was saying, you know, vive le Québec libre. So, and Pierre was saying, I'm Canadian. What the hell? I'm a French Canadian, but I'm a Canadian. That's who I am. So what is this separatist nonsense, you know? So he was just not used. He was not employed. I mean, Radio Canada did not use his services. Other people would not hire him. So Pierre had a rough time there for a while. And I was always disappointed that Yvette did not hire Pierre to direct for the Théâtre de Rideau Vert. You know, I mean, she didn't hire him. I think it's because of the other pressure. People like Gilles Pelletier. Gilles, I worked with him many times, with Rupert. He was in the Montserrat.